Master Sergeant Crane had made up his mind before Duvall ever set foot in the compound. That was the part that would matter later. Not the moments when she exceeded every expectation he'd set. Not the missions where each calculation he'd made about her turned out to be precisely wrong. What mattered was the sequence. The file on his desk, the decision already reached, and then a young woman arriving in the Syrian dust with no idea that someone who had never met her had already decided her fate. He stood in the briefing room of Bravo, Element's forward position northeast of Hasaka, and read her record aloud to the assembled operators as though presenting evidence at a trial where the verdict had already been entered. Staff Sergeant Duvall, he said, 26, completed radar assessment and selection 9 months ago. Bottom quartile of her cohort on physical evaluations, no combat deployments. He set the file down. He did not look at Aldgate, who was leaning against the wall with the particular stillness of a man choosing not to respond. She has a dual qualification, Crane continued. Combat medic, designated marksman. What she does not have is anything that tells me she can function when her training and reality start arguing with each other, which they always do. Gunnery Sergeant Aldgate pushed off the wall. The orders come from group top, not from us. Orders tell me she's attached for evaluation. They say nothing about deployment. Crane looked around the room, at Leffer, at Bosch, at Senna, all of them watching him with the careful neutrality of people who knew better than to stake a position. She stays in the wire until she proves otherwise. And I am going to be very honest with you. I don't think she will. He picked up the file. He did not throw it. He set it in the corner of his desk with a deliberateness that was, in its way, more final than throwing it would have been. Before we go any further, stay with this story. What happened over the next 3 weeks would change the way every man in that room understood the word qualified. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this one reaches now. Let me tell you about the woman who already knew what they thought of her, and came anyway. Duvall arrived on a late afternoon logistics run, her gear stacked in the back of a supply vehicle driven by a 19-year-old named Pitts, who had not yet mastered the art of conversation under pressure. He tried twice to start one and abandoned both attempts when he couldn't find the right register. Somewhere between formal and casual was a staff sergeant who kept her eyes on the road and didn't seem to need the silence filled. She had her brother's trauma shears clipped to the inside of her left sleeve. She had carried them for 3 years. Eli Duvall had been an Army combat medic when a vehicle-borne IED took his patrol outside Kandahar in 2019. He was 24. She was 23, 2 months out of her own basic training, and the call came on a Tuesday morning while the barracks were still quiet. His personal effects arrived in a USPS flat-rate box. The trauma shears were at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of gray undershirt. She stared at them for a long time before she understood what she was going to do with her life. She didn't talk about Eli often, not because the grief was still raw. It had moved through her long ago and settled somewhere behind her sternum, present but manageable, but because she'd found that people heard, "My brother died in service," and immediately started doing the math wrong, assigning her motivations that were simpler than the truth. She was not here to honor a memory. She was not here to prove a point. She was here because she was exceptionally good at 2 things: keeping people alive and hitting what she aimed at. And this was the place those skills were needed most. What she didn't know yet was that the man running Bravo Element had already decided she was neither. Chief Warrant Officer Orvid found her first, which was fortunate. He was the Element's senior medic, 51 years old, with the kind of face that had earned its lines honestly. He had been in enough places long enough to recognize capability before it had the chance to demonstrate itself. He shook her hand in the vehicle bay while Pitts was still unloading. Orvid, senior medic. Duvall. Crane speak to you yet? Not yet. Orvid's expression did not change, which communicated something all by itself. Come find me after, he said. I'll show you where things are. Crane's office was a repurposed storage room with a plywood desk and a map of northeastern Syria pinned to the wall with so many colored markers it looked like a piece of textile art. He did not ask Duvall to sit. He stood behind the desk and told her, with the direct efficiency of a man who had delivered similar assessments across multiple deployments, that she would not be deploying with the elements. until he had personally observed her demonstrate capability under conditions that approximated real operational stress. He expected argument. What he got instead was a single question. What do you need to see? The flatness of it threw him slightly. He recovered everything, starting at 0600. What followed over the next 4 days was a systematic dismantling of every assumption Crane had constructed, conducted by Duvall herself without apparent awareness that she was doing it. The physical assessments were not where she excelled. She was not the strongest on the team, and she did not perform as though she believed otherwise. On the 4-mile run in full kit, she finished third from last. On the weighted carries, she was slower than Bosch by nearly 2 minutes. Crane noted this. Leffert noted this. Senna looked at the ground. Then they went to the range. The setup was standard. Targets at 300, 500, and 800 meters. Variable crosswind from the northwest, time pressure across each engagement. Duvall shot from a prone position with an M110 she had rebuilt twice since arriving, making small adjustments that Orvid watched from behind, with the quiet attention of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. She hit the 300-meter target with a kind of unhurried precision that suggested she was thinking about something else entirely. She hit the 500-meter target twice in under 4 seconds. At 800 meters into a crosswind that had shifted while she was calculating, she made one adjustment to her scope, waited, and squeezed. Senna said quietly, It was the most anyone offered. Crane ran her through the stress course that afternoon. Full kit, repetitions, smoke, disorienting noise, then engagement scenarios while her heart rate was still elevated. She missed one shot. One. When Crane approached to tell her that was exactly his concern, she looked at the miss, then at him. It'll be 0 next time, she said. How many more runs do you need? He ran it 3 more times. She did not miss again. That evening, Orvid found him by the vehicle bay. She's the real thing, Orvid said. She hasn't been shot at yet. Neither had any of us once. Crane didn't answer. That was the problem with Orvid. He had the infuriating habit of saying things that were simultaneously accurate and entirely beside whatever point Crane was trying to make. The first mission came 11 days into Duvall's attachment. The target was a logistics facilitator for the Al Tawhid network. A mid-level figure named Nassim Khalid, who used a compound outside Tel Brak as a meeting site twice monthly, regular as a scheduled appointment. Group wanted him detained if possible, eliminated if necessary. Bravo element would insert via ground under cover of darkness, breach the compound, and extract in under 15 minutes. Duvall was not on the manifest. I need someone on the high ground east of the compound, Aldgate said during the final planning session. Clear line of sight to the access road and the south wall. We don't have a dedicated overwatch position covered. We'll manage, Crane said. We've managed without one before. That doesn't make it the right call. Crane looked at Duvall, who was standing at the back of the room. She did not look hopeful. She looked like someone who had been told something difficult and had decided deliberately not to perform her reaction to it. She stays, Crane said. She stayed. It went wrong at the 13-minute mark. The breach had been clean. Khalid was not in the compound, an intelligence failure, but 3 of his people were, and those 3 people had radios, and by the time Bravo element was moving to their vehicles, the northern access road had 2 pickup trucks moving hard with lights off, which indicated someone had been observing and waiting. Leffert called it on the net. Crane redirected the team east. The east route had its own truck. Bosch went down 12 meters short of the vehicles. The round took him in the left leg, shattering the fibula. He stayed conscious, stayed vocal, which is how Crane knew it wasn't arterial, but he could not move independently, and the weight of a man in full kit is not something people truly understand until they are attempting to move one through active fire in the dark. Duvall was already at the ridgeline east of the compound. She had not asked permission. She had collected her rifle and medical pack, gotten Pitts to drive her to the eastern checkpoint on a pretext, and walked the remaining kilometer on foot. She was in position before the first contact report hit the net. Crane's voice on the radio controlled and clipped, asking for suppression on the northern trucks. Leffert reporting their organic firepower was insufficient at that angle. Duvall keyed her radio. Bravo 6, this is Duvall. I have eyes on the northern access and the south wall. Request permission to engage. A pause. In that pause, anyone listening carefully could hear the specific quality of a man recalibrating in real time. How did you? Crane started. Permission to engage, Bravo 6. A beat. Granted. She took the first shot at 420 meters, working from memory on the distance because she hadn't had time to range it. The driver of the lead truck. The truck swerved and stopped. The vehicle behind it braked hard, and the 6 seconds of confusion that created were enough for Leffer and Senna to move Bosch the remaining distance to the extraction vehicles. But Bosch was losing blood, not critically, not yet. The exit wound from a fragmenting round through the fibula is larger than a clean break produces, which means more soft tissue damage than anything visible from the outside suggests. She knew this because she had spent 3 years studying exactly this category of wound. In classrooms and simulation, bays, and one training rotation in Germany where an instructor told her she was the most methodical student he'd encountered in 11 years of teaching. She left her rifle. She ran down from the ridgeline in the dark, using the stalled trucks as cover, reached the vehicle cluster as Leffer was attempting to load Bosch and simultaneously relay the situation to Crane. Move, she said to Leffer. She had the tourniquet applied in 11 seconds. She had been timed at 9 in training, but Bosch was not a practice mannequin, and he was not cooperating. You're okay, she told him. It was both a medical assessment and an instruction. Bosch chose to believe her. The vehicle extraction took 4 minutes. The drive back to the FOB took 22. Duvall sat with her fingers on Bosch's pulse and said very little. Crane did not speak to her for the first hour after return. He was in the debrief, then on the radio with Group, then standing in the medical bay doorway watching Orvid work on Bosch's leg, while Duvall stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, the trauma shears still clipped to her sleeve where they always were. He came to stand beside her. You disobeyed a direct order, he said. Yes, Sergeant. You abandoned your position. I hadn't been assigned a position. I wasn't on the manifest. The precision of the correction would have irritated him more if it hadn't been accurate. He was quiet a moment. She's right, Orvid said from across the room, not looking up. And Bosch keeps the leg because of it, possibly more. Crane said nothing. He turned and left. Aldgate found Duvall in the vehicle bay an hour later, cleaning her rifle. He's not going to say it directly, Aldgate said. I know. But you're on the next manifest. She didn't look up from the bolt assembly. Good. It was not arrogance. It was the specific variety of confidence that does not require an audience, built deliberately over years, specifically engineered to withstand rooms full of people who had already decided she couldn't do what she was doing. The second mission was a trap from the beginning. They simply didn't know it yet. The intelligence had come through a local intermediary group, had been running for 8 months, whose information had been consistently reliable until it wasn't. The target, a building on the southern approach to a small village, where 2 NGO workers were reportedly being held by Al-Tawhid operatives before a scheduled video broadcast. The window was 12 hours. After that, the workers would be moved or the broadcast would happen, and neither outcome was acceptable. Bravo element inserted by helicopter 2 kilometers from the target. They moved through a dry riverbed. The satellite imagery had shown to be clear. The satellite imagery was wrong, which is how traps work. The first indication was a flare. The second indication was that the flare had not been fired by anyone on Bravo's side. What followed was automatic fire from 3 directions simultaneously, north, east, and from the roof of a building on the western approach that had not appeared in the pre-mission imagery at all. Prepared positions, covered arcs. Someone had known exactly where Bravo element would be and exactly when, and had arranged the terrain accordingly. Crane called the fallback, move to the vehicle drop point, establish a perimeter, hold for the QRF that had been pre-positioned 40 minutes out. It was the correct decision. It was also the kind of correct decision that cost lives in the interval between making it and executing it, because falling back through prepared ambush positions requires sustained suppression from a direction the ambushing force is not expecting. Duvall moved to the eastern ridge before Crane finished the sentence. She was not the fastest, but she had looked at the terrain imagery 6 times during planning. and had already identified 3 positions on that ridge with clear fields of fire that would not silhouette her against the sky. She reached the first position in under 5 minutes, settled in, and started working. The western rooftop first, 3 men, 1 heavy weapon. She took the gunner and shifted. She took the second man as he reached for the weapon. The third dropped below the parapet, which was sensible of him and temporarily acceptable to her. Senna's voice on the net, west side suppressed, moving. She was already working north. The contacts in the rocks above the riverbed were using natural cover, with the unhurried patience of fighters who believed they controlled the engagement. She spent 40 seconds identifying workable angles. Then, she spent the next 90 removing their advantage. Bravo element was moving. She tracked them by voice and by the rhythm of their return fire, adjusting her priorities to match what they needed, rather than what she could see, which is a particular skill most shooters never fully develop. Duvall had been practicing it since she was 23, in a field in Montana with her brother, standing behind her telling her that reading the situation was harder than reading the distance, and that the distance was only the beginning. Then a vehicle appeared from the south. 4 fighters in the bed, mounted gun, barrel traversing toward the section of riverbed where Leffer and Senna were still in the open. Duvall had 11 rounds left. She used 4 on the vehicle. She used 2 on the fighters who dismounted from it. She used 3 more to keep the northern position from reorganizing. That left her 2 rounds, a sidearm with 1 partial magazine, and a ridgeline that 4 fighters from the eastern position had now correctly identified as the source of what had been ending their evening. Crane on the radio, voice flat with the specific tension of a man managing his own fear. Duvall, QRF is 17 minutes. Can you hold? 17 minutes was not a number she was going to reach, and they both understood that. Get the team to the vehicle point, she said. I'll manage. That is not a plan. Bravo 6. She heard the exchange in the background, heard his hand cover the mic. She used the 2 seconds to move. Get them out. I'll be at the vehicle point. She did not specify when. She made it off the ridge. She made it most of the way to the vehicle point before her left knee registered the shrapnel fragment she hadn't noticed entering it somewhere in the preceding minutes. The ground was uneven, and she was moving fast, and when the knee decided it was done immediately and without negotiation. She was on the ground, 50 meters from the vehicles, when the helicopter appeared. Not the QRF, too soon, the extraction bird that had been told to hold clear. Aldgate was in the open door. He was using the register of a man who had decided calmness was the only useful contribution available to him. Duvall, can you walk? She stood up. She could not walk. She moved anyway. Crane was on the tarmac when the helicopter landed. He stood at the edge of the medical bay and watched while Orvid worked on her knee, and his expression had moved past the categories he'd been using since her file first landed on his desk. It was not admiration exactly. It was something that precedes admiration. The moment a person recognizes that the framework they've been applying to a situation has simply stopped fitting the evidence they've accumulated. He came to her after Orvid finished, when the adrenaline had dropped and the knee had stiffened into something that made movement a specific and unpleasant project. The aid workers weren't in the building, he said. It was empty. The entire operation was constructed to bring us into a prepared ambush. I know. We have a meeting with group tomorrow about the intelligence failure. He paused. Your name is going to come up, for the right reasons. She waited. Crane was not a man who offered things easily. What came next had the slightly labored quality of something retrieved from a location he did not open often. I made a judgment before I had the information to make it, he said. That's not a professional habit I'm proud of, and I was wrong about you. He let that sit for a moment. I was wrong about you from the beginning. Duvall did not say I know, though it would have been accurate. She said, I'd like to be on the next manifest. The corner of his mouth moved. It was barely anything. It was more than she'd seen from him in 3 weeks. You're not going near a manifest for 3 weeks minimum, he said. That knee needs a surgeon, and the surgeon is going to tell you 6 weeks, and you're going to negotiate it down to 4, and I'm going to accept 3 because we don't have better options. He extended his hand, but after that, you're on the team. Full status, no conditions, no qualifiers, no evaluation period. You've been through it. She shook his hand. From the far end of the bay, Aldgate started clapping. It was slow, deliberate, the kind that carries weight rather than enthusiasm. Leffert joined, then Senna. Bosch, from his cot with his leg elevated, raised one fist. Orvid, who had started all of this by saying she's the real thing to a man who wasn't ready to hear it, said nothing. He simply nodded once and went back to his supply inventory, which was the highest compliment available to him. The flight home routed through Ramstein, then Atlanta, then a commuter connection to Billings. She rented a car and drove east while the mountains did what Montana mountains do in the evening, which is turn every color available before settling into a deep, specific purple that exists nowhere else. Eli's grave was in a small military cemetery outside Hardin. She had not been back in 16 months. She sat in the grass beside the headstone for a long time. A wind moved through the cottonwoods at the cemetery's edge. A hawk worked a thermal above the southern ridge, patient and unhurried in the way that only things without deadlines ever are. I used the shears, she said, 3 times in the field now. Once where it counted most. She looked at the stone. You would have been faster on the tourniquet, probably not faster on the 800-meter shot. She stayed until the light was fully gone. The call came on day 11 of a mandated 21-day recovery. Crane. Not Aldgate, not the group assignments office. Crane himself, which communicated everything before he said a word. Khlit moved locations, he said, without preamble. We have a confirmed position and a 12-hour window. Group approved a full element package. He paused, and in the pause was something he was not going to name out loud. I put in a request to pull you back early. Cleared it with the medical office this morning. Another pause. Your call. She looked at her knee. The surgeon had said 4 weeks minimum. It had been 11 days. What time does the flight leave? She said. She heard something shift on his end of the line. Not quite relief. Something quieter than that and more honest. Pitts will get you from the airport, Crane said. She hung up and started packing. The trauma shears went in first, clipped to the inside of her left sleeve, where they had always gone, since a flat-rate box arrived at a barracks in the early morning 3 years ago, and she understood, finally, what she was going to do with her life. Then the rifle case, then the medical pack, then everything else that had been sitting in the corner of her rental, waiting with the patience of objects that belong somewhere else. She had come into this believing she had something to prove. Somewhere in the preceding 3 weeks, she had realized she'd been wrong about that. Not about her ability, but about the proving itself. What she was good at did not exist for the benefit of people who doubted it. It existed because Bosch had a daughter in Sacramento, and Leffert had a wife he was trying to get back to in Pensacola, and Senna had been attempting to finish an online degree for 4 years and had 6 credits left. None of them were getting back to any of that without someone on the ridge, doing the work with steady hands and a clear head, the way her brother had taught her a long time ago in a field in Montana when the world was still simple enough that a lesson could fit in an afternoon. She locked the door of the rental and walked to her car in the dark. She wasn't going back to prove anything. She was just going back.